Have a call vote. Rochelle?
Here.
Susan?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Philip?
Here.
Maureen? Here. Eric?
Aye.
All right, ayes have it, motion is carried. All right, order of business. There are no public appearances today. Can I have a motion for the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Ayes have it, motion is carried. All right, moving on to recognitions.
Okay, so I'd like to start tonight with one that's not on our list. I'd like to recognize Kevin Miker. Many of you know Kevin. He has worked in a variety of roles in the district, but most recently here at the district office as our night custodian. And Kevin is going to be retiring this summer. And his last day will be on July 8th. And so I'm not sure if he's in the building tonight. If he is, make sure you say hi to him on the way out, and he'll be sorely missed. He's a person that it's great to have someone that cares so much about about the district and obviously takes good care of us here in the building. So congratulations to Kevin.
Do we get to have a cake? So Kevin's going to be gone before we meet again, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, also congratulations to the class of 2023 on their recent graduation. We are so proud of each student for their hard work, determination, and accomplishments throughout their high school careers, and we certainly wish them the best in their future endeavors. Also, big thank you to all of our staff for their incredible and meaningful work for this past school year. We know our students were in great hands and are already looking forward to the growth and memories that will occur next fall. Congratulations to Monona's local radio station, WVMO, who was named Station of the Year by the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association, among other awards. The high school AV club also took home a few awards, including graphic design, live sports coverage, talk show, and live events. And there's more information about the WVMO and the AV club in our Herald Independent website. And the end of the school year is always a fun time for our students and staff as they have especially fun, memorable events happening around the school, especially the school field days or Kids' Choice Days, where students spend quality time outside with their peers and teachers playing games and doing fun activities. You can find a number of photos capturing the fun on our Facebook page for all of the schools.
I'm going to add another congratulations to our fellow board member who recently had the birth of his new child. So congratulations.
May 17th. Thank you.
All right. No correspondence and announcements. Administrative reports. Dan.
Okay, the first item, an update on Maywood School. So we last spoke about that at the board meeting in April and mentioned that we're in communication with the city about possible lease agreement. Those talks are still going on and we're close to reaching an agreement, but it will not be for the upcoming school year. Because of all the staffing that they would have to hire and create programs, this would have really had been done, quite a while ago. So I personally don't think that's a bad thing. We know that we're going to be utilizing part of the school with our transition program, as you heard about, earlier, and then we'll have plenty of time to be able to work out the details. And so Mark's been working with Jake Anderson from Park and Rec, and we're hoping to have an agreement really soon, by the fall for the following year.
Susan?
Dan, are we still going to put the transition students in that building?
Yes.
Are you going to wait a year to do that, or are you going to start doing that now?
No, they'll definitely start for the school year.
Okay, because I have now met at least 2 or 3 of our transition students, and again, the people, Paul Baumgartner, Mike Mayfield, that are working with those students, and the whole staff, when you come in and they introduce you to the student, just love the students that they're working with. It's such a positive feeling. It just feels great.
So absolutely, we're really excited to have that space
That's
available.
great. Okay.
Yeah. So
Elizabeth?
So does this mean there won't be any wrap for 4K in Monona?
correct.
Okay.
Or not through that program. maybe.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. And the other things just are more reminders, but strategic planning we haven't talked about in a while. We have our full admin team and teacher leaders meeting tomorrow for our admin team retreat, which kind of begins the process of wrapping up year end, looking at data and starting to look ahead to goal setting for next year and so on. And so we will come together again in August, and then probably a detailed, we have on the calendar, a detailed report to TLE in August, and then to be determined when certainly the full board will be getting updates as well. So really excited to pull the team together tomorrow. And lastly, as a reminder, summer school starts next Monday, so a week reprieve in between, and then we hit it again, and again, really excited. The coordinators have done a great job of putting that together, and looking forward to having a lot of students back in the buildings again next Monday.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I was curious about how enrollment looks and how staffing looks for it.
Okay. I'm going to defer to Lisa. I don't have those numbers. I know you gave me a little bit of an update on the staffing piece, but.
Sure. So Granite Ridge, which will host Taylor Prairie, Cottage Grove, and Granite Ridge itself, students, we're up about 460 students for summer school, which is about like capacity during the school year.
Yeah, that's
so
great.
It'll be a full building. Looking at Winnequa, we have about 300, maybe a little over in summer school there, so about half capacity, but still for summer school, pretty awesome.
Yeah.
GDS, we have about 125 students participating in summer school. And then at the high school, registration for that literally just ended because sometimes second semester you don't know if you need it or not.
Sure.
But credit recovery mostly at the high school. And then we have a full load of students in the ACT prep class. But we usually run about 100 students or so at the high school.
Great. How's staffing looking?
Staffing went really well. So yeah, thank you for the consideration that you all gave for the hourly wage for summer school staffing. I think that adjustment made a big difference, and as Dan mentioned, our summer school coordinators, who are the assistant principals in those buildings, did a really nice job getting their people in the right spots. So
Great.
We're excited for summer school. Yeah,
Great.
bring them on.
Yeah, nice work.
Monday is Juneteenth Day, so there may be students that may be observing that. How will that impact students that may not want to come to school to celebrate the holiday?
No, that's fine. I mean, summer school, there isn't an attendance requirement per se. Like, we want students there and enjoying, but their family vacations, other commitments. Sometimes we have students who miss here and there throughout. Usually they just communicate that sometimes ahead of time, sometimes when they come back, but we just welcome them when they show up and plug them in as best we can, and they have fun with their peers and they enjoy the offerings, and yeah, it works out just fine. So not an issue in the least at all.
All right. Moving on to board reports. Teaching, Learning, and Equity Committee.
Yeah, so Teaching, Learning, and Equity met on May 24th. In addition to our committee members, we had Katie, Danielle, and Emily, and Dan there. And the primary agenda item was to discuss evaluating the grade level configuration specifically for Cottage Grove School and Taylor Prairie. It's on the agenda for discussion later, so we'll get into the bulk majority of what we talked about then.
All right. Monona Grove Education Foundation. Susan Manning.
They did not meet in June.
All right, moving on to possible action items. Employee health care benefits plan.
Okay, so with us tonight, we have Al Yeager, who is our consultant with USI, and he's going to walk us through basically from beginning to end about our process in evaluating our current health premium situation, and along with that, we'll wrap up with our recommendation to the board.
Sounds good. So in terms of the process, we had multiple committee meetings that included a cross-section of staff members and administration, and in that process, I mean, it's been many years now that we've gone through this process. Last year, the specific process, we ended up making plan design changes. And in terms of those plan design changes, it cost more to access care, co-pays, deductibles, co-insurances, that type of thing. For the agenda, the idea is to go through what options we looked at this year, some detailed information, the consideration, and then the timeline. Specifically, the options looked at: status quo, whether that's no changes to the plan design and maintain both Dean and Quartz. We have the luxury of being one of the few districts in Dane County that have option between Dean and Quartz, Dean and UW. Meanwhile, the other considerations we look at is plan design change. So whether we look to a high deductible with an HSA like some other districts do, maintaining Dean and Quartz, or do we go to Dean and GHC? GHC, the nice part about GHC that you may or may not know is they now have, not only have they always had access to specialty care with the UW, but now they also have primary care access to UW in Dane County as well, so it mitigates a lot of the disruption. Revisited the ETF, the state plan, which we had, I don't remember how many years now, 8-ish. Revisit that as a consideration. Or do we go to one carrier like a lot of the other peer districts we have? Do we consolidate with one carrier? And just for perspective, currently we have enrollment-wise between the UW Quartz has 62 individuals and 208 family enrolled with them, so that's the UW portion. Meanwhile, Dean enrollment is 49 single and 112 family, and with almost 2/3 of the families with the UW. So those are the options reviewed. The recommendation was to maintain the current design, so instead of making plan design changes, keeping the same plan design, but meanwhile replacing Quartz with GHC. And there's a few reasons there. The summary statement would be it creates the least amount of disruption of all the options. And when I say disruption, cost and overall disruption period. The GHC rates are 3.9% above the current Quartz rates. The overall district contribution would, with this recommendation, increase the budget by 3.9%, $270,000. If you're looking at other peer districts, that's outperforming the norm. We're outperforming the norm of what other districts, when you talk with other districts, in many instances are significantly higher. GHC has not only the Dane County UW, as I had mentioned, for specialty and primary care, it also has Unity Point, Meritor primary care providers in the network. It also refers specialty care to UW as mentioned, and we have multi-year caps in the equation. So we know that GHC won't be more than 7.5% for the following year and 8.5% for the year after. We have also a couple of other peers, specifically in the Badger Conference, that had converted in the last year, that had very favorable experience in their transition. And what this translates to is, for the staff members, the biggest area of impact, in addition to providers, is what's this mean to my paycheck, right? So right now, present year, the Dean staff that have single plan coverage paying $88 a month and 219 family. The Dean renewal will be 104 single and 205. The Quartz current is 71 single, 177 family, and the GHC replacement will be $72 single and 185 family. Had we stayed with status quo, the Quartz cost would have jumped up from 207 single and 268 family. So clearly a significant increase from a family that's over $1,000 a year. That would be an increase. So when I say the least disruption, that certainly is a significant difference. Now, it doesn't come without disruption. 5% of current Quartz members would have a primary care provider disrupted when transitioning. Meanwhile, GHC does have specialists in their own network clinics that, and sometimes that being the case, they would need to start with that specialist. And For out of area, if individuals that have some of the courts out of area, there's a couple of individuals which we'll talk through that had some disruption out of area. They'd either have a PPO option with GHC that would cost more, or Dean certainly has some options for providers out of area too, that in the past Dean cost more, so they might have taken courts for that reason. Meanwhile, the two specialists that are of note, specifically associated physician and Julius Caldwell. There are, when we look at that, there are 46 individuals that have utilized out of 882 courts members, those providers. So they would in fact have, those would be the key area of disruption. Meanwhile, out of area, individuals that would be in Columbia, that are in the Columbia, Dane, Grant, Iowa, Jefferson, Juneau, and Lafayette, and Sauk, we have the GHC providers. Meanwhile, if you live outside of these counties, they would have access to the PPO. And I know a lot of these other slides that are included are intended for the members, so they're educational pieces on where to go. Certainly not board meeting, roll your eyes back, this is a lot of details. But when we get to the summary of the timeline, the idea was on May 17th, we went through this with the committee. This was the last committee meeting we went through. And with the understanding that we'd be presenting the same discussion for this meeting as a recommendation to the board. And the idea is based on the decision would be open enrollment. So in October is when the staff members, we go through the final education of, okay, here are your options, here are your choices for those disrupted. Just make sure you have a smooth transition, or see if we can get any other continuity of care. And then effective January 1st would be the final year. So I know I covered a fair amount of material, but that I think are the biggest pieces of the equation.
Eric?
So if I understand, I have a lot of experience with this because I'm actually in a system that has had GHC for 20 years, and now we are switching to courts. From my understanding, did you say that courts was going to raise the rates? Was that right, if you stayed with that plan?
Correct.
But that's not on here anywhere that shows that, what that cost would be?
They were increasing it by 7.4%.
7.4%.
Actually, I'm sorry, I take it back. The blend was 7.4. They were increasing by 10%.
So if you stayed on the current plan with courts, there would be an increase of 10% cost for employees.
For the courts plan. Yes.
For the courts plan, okay. So when you look at the slide that says, slide number 4, and it says that number there with courts where it says 177, that's the current number.
It's slide 3.
Oh, I'm sorry, maybe it's slide 3.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
the other attachment has all the detailed numbers too.
Yeah, okay.
Just, you know.
It wouldn't be 177, there would be 10% increase if you were going to stay with courts, right?
Yes.
Okay,
So-
I just wanted to clarify because I was a little confused by that. So.
Well, the overall rates would go up 10%. The impact to the staff members would even be more than that.
Okay, all right. Okay. And then with GHC, because there's obviously going to be a disruption whenever you make a change. So people are going to go from courts, probably to GHC is going to be the biggest disruption because they'll have to choose courts or dean. Is there if you anticipated possibly any things with, pharmacy coverage or anything like that that they might not cover that's being covered by GHC? For instance, if somebody has like some very specialist pharmacy stuff for cancer or whatever, that might not be, it's being covered with GHC, it may not, or it's being covered with courts that it might not be covered with GHC?
So a lot of transition of care discussion items that to mitigate any of those disruptors.
Okay.
So that's a big piece of the conversion process. The good news is, I'll use Oregon to 4 similar sized districts had transitioned their entire population. I will say we were able to really not have that type of a concern.
Okay.
about disruption.
Okay, thank you.
No, great question. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I was just thinking on the lines of what Eric is saying, some of the procedures, maybe like x-rays or things of that nature. I know I had, my company, unlike Eric's, went the opposite way, similar. So we had courts, went to GHC. And some of the things I found is that now I have to ask permission from GHC to get certain procedures. So just was wondering if that's a discussion at all.
It is a discussion, and, it's been a pretty prevalent discussion, not just within the committee of Monona Grove, but each year we have all the area districts participating in a meeting, and in that meeting, we have each of the provider systems, including the health plan with GHC, with courts, and talk through their differences in approaches.
Sure.
And there is certainly with the primary care model that GHC has, there's more interest in engaging with the primary care specialist.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're seeing is statistically, what we've been, by having more engagement and having more, I'll say, involvement with that prevention focus, we're seeing cost increasing less for employers that have greater engagement like that. And the GHC groups are proving to have fewer or lower rate increases. Does that sometimes feel like a hassle factor? Yeah. I mean, that can be true, but we are seeing the Wanakees, the Sun Prairies, they're districts that are setting up incentives that everyone has to go see their primary care specialist. Now, that's not, but they're not with GHC, but they're trying to recreate a GHC type of a model for staff engage early and often with prevention. And oh, by the way, behavioral health is a big area of concern. And one of the things GHC does is they also have a behavioral health specialist that's right on the wings, so that when they see through their questions any red flags, they try to, part of the thought process is let's capture it sooner than later, because we all know if things are prolonged or caught too late, behavioral health being a key category, that's where we're seeing a lot of benefit.
Okay, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth?
Thank you for this. It's always helpful when you come and talk about things. Question about choices for staff and whether or not we considered offering both sort of this traditional, like full coverage, low deductible plan, and also a high deductible with an HSA, so that staff can make that choice.
We did, and I would say that would be something we probably want to keep looking at as consideration. I'll use DeForest as an example. They went away from, they had a high deductible option. They went away from it, and part of the reason, what we've seen with the pandemic are a couple of things. We're seeing a spike in specialty prescriptions. We're seeing some specialty drugs that are hundreds of thousands of dollars, number one. Number two, we're seeing care that wasn't, preventative care that's not being captured early enough and often enough, which is causing the conditions that aren't caught to be bigger. And why I'm bringing those details up is having a high deductible plan means you capture a lot less premium. And now all of a sudden, you have these spikes in claims, and then the rate increases go up significantly. And until we start capturing the preventative coverage at a higher level, I don't know if that's a good idea.
Yeah.
We see other districts that are doing it, but I would qualify them as they're probably more in a 60 to 70% of the adults are seeking an annual preventative visit. The rest of us are more in that 35 to 42% range. And we need to get
it's just the
that
risk is
covered
too
first.
high.
Yes.
Got it.
What it'll do is throw up our budget from this increase standpoint if we jump to that too soon.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Michelle?
How do these all flush out for co-pays? Are they similar? Is there a deductible that needs to be?
We matched it up so that the staff should not see any differential between plan design. And as much as I'd like to take the credit for capturing all the details, the team here at MG knows that Heather and cohort is much better at that than me to make sure those details are covered.
Another question? May I have a motion? Thank you.
I move approval of the employee health care benefits plan effective January 1st, 2024 as presented.
I'll second that.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Ayes have it, motion is carried.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all very
Take
much.
care.
Thank
Likewise.
you.
Thanks.
All right, next is the 2023-2024 preliminary budget.
You can say anything. Okay.
That's all you
Step on your toes here.
It's your time to shine, Mark.
Yeah, well, you know, sometimes superintendents like to talk.
Make it rain, Mark.
I just want to say that thank you very much for the way you put the material together. It really helped in understanding what you're doing, where you're going in your process. I really appreciate that.
Sure, thank you. Well, start off, obviously, we passed a referendum for the first year, $6 million to exceed the revenue cap, and that's considered here, of course. The last couple of days, I'm sure everybody has kind of been aware last week about the negotiations for the state budget and what's been going on with that. Some of the, I guess the two main things that have come out of it so far are an increase in the revenue cap for $325 per student, and then the increase in the handicap aid, or special ed aid, I should say, is going up to 33%. It's about 31 right now. So those are taken into consideration in this calculation as well, because it seems like those are pretty much a done deal, but we can adjust if we go once we go forward. On the memo, just provide a reminder of the key dates. We do a preliminary budget so we can start the year. July 1st, we get state aid. Who knows what that will be? There's been talk of there's going to be money put into the state aid formula, but if they have time to do it, they won't do it now for July 1 because nothing's been approved. So we'll have an estimate based on the current allocation. And then we just keep fine tuning until the annual meeting, third Friday count, and then around the 15th, they certify the aid, and then we can certify the levy and finalize the budget 3 months after it's approved. So that's kind of the way we deal with it. But just to hit the highlights on the revenue assumptions, as I said, $325 per pupil. We're expecting increase of 50 students. The revenue limit also has an increase of the $6 million that was approved. Open enrollment is increase of 3%. General state aid, which we used in some of the assumptions for the referendum, an increase of 5%. Our per pupil allocation from the state every year, which is currently $742. Current grant allocations, special ed reimbursement of 33%, and then as we presented the budget this year, we will be using all the ESSER money to balance the budget this year. So that will all be claimed in 22-23. On the expenditure side, settlement with the GEA that we
I'm sorry, could you back up on what you just said about the ESSER budget again?
the ESSER money, we'll be using it all this year.
You were using it this
Yeah,
year?
yeah.
Okay, it's used up.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Will be. Settlement with the MGEA, projected increases for the administrative and support staff were some are in line with the MGE agreement. As Al said, we're about a 4% increase on the health insurance for both plans. Dental insurance, we're self-funded now. That's 5% increase we're looking at. We will finalize that with Al and his team later in the year. Transportation, 3%. Utilities, 5%, and then open enrollment expenses on the other side, 3%. So with the summary on the next piece of it, or the 7-page document I gave you explaining the budget, we do currently have a balanced budget. We're looking at a total revenue and expenditure budget of $54.8 million. And then I just provided, some of the details that goes into the special ed budget, because part of that is funded by a transfer from Fund 10. And then kind of the main ones are the nutrition and Fund 80, because we do a levy to Fund 80. So that's kind of where we are with the budget. As I said, we'll keep updating as we get better information. Nicole keeps hiring people, so I have to take that into consideration. And so, for some reason, we have to fill positions. I don't understand it, but whatever. So anyway, that's kind of where we are, and entertain any questions.
Peter?
Why did open enrollment expenses go up 3%? What drives that?
The allocation from the state.
Oh, that's revenue.
Yeah, well, it's both revenue and expenditures.
okay.
Because we have to pay and then we get paid. So it's 8,200 this year. Usually it's about a 3% increase of the allocation, so it go up to 80, whatever that is, 8,500.
The 325, is 325
Yeah.
is what the proposed
Mhm.
increase is. Is that revenue limit, is that funded from the state or is that going on the levy?
Levy.
It's all on the
Well,
levy.
yeah,
Is this,
mostly
do we
levy.
know what the state is putting on the, do we know if there's a change in what the state aid or how much is?
Not yet.
You don't know?
No,
Okay.
because it has run through the formula and it takes everybody's total into consideration. They're putting more money into it, usually do that, but the depending on
Compared to the
how much.
325, how
Right.
much is it?
Uh,
You have no idea.
No,
Okay.
until we get the final numbers.
Okay.
But obviously that impact will go down if we get more state aid.
Right, yeah, I'm trying to figure out what the,
Yeah,
just
I
trying
no
to
idea
get a
at
bill
this point. But I predicted that when I did the revenue or the referendum projections, I assumed we were going to get 5% more in aid. So if we get more, that's great, then the impact will be less.
And I know you live and breathe these numbers, but all the time. It's a little hard for me to see when they're not compared to anything.
Right,
So, you
yeah.
know, just
Yeah.
if you can do us the favor of putting the
Sure.
current budget into
Yeah.
these. And I know this is all preliminary, just
Right.
getting started here, but just going forward.
Sure, and I followed the same format Jared had done.
Yeah.
But our overall budget this year is about 50 million, so you
Yeah.
can see.
Yeah, okay, 54.
Yeah.
What are the largest changes? What are the biggest changes this year? See,
Staff.
staff.
About
Just that
8%.
8%, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, obviously utilities, transportation, all those kind of set numbers go up every year. And, you know, once we get the final numbers from the end of the year, we do projections based off that as well. So they can be adjusted going forward.
Yeah, of course.
So.
Thank you. It's nice. It is a nice document. So
Mhm.
thank you very much. I'm not complaining about the document. Just that I look at this
No, I
and say,
understand that
is
too.
5,200, 5.2 million, is that an increase or decrease? That's
Yeah.
what I'm after. So thank you.
Yep.
All right, any other questions?
I guess I was just going to say, just for the audience, can we get Mark's recommendation up? We've got
That's probably-
4K2 school teaching, learning, and equity committee.
Yeah, so the document will be available. I'm not sure whether that's shown or not on the live feed.
Okay.
All right, can I have a motion, please?
I'll move approval of the 2023-2024 preliminary budget as presented.
Second.
Go ahead.
Elizabeth beat you to it. All right, any further discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it, motion is carried. Next is the lease agreement with Capital Financial Services.
Yeah, we've had a kind of a blanket lease with American Capital for the last 4 years where we have run our major technology purchases through, and so we set it up in a 3 or 4 year cycle. And so one comes off, one goes on, type of thing, and then additional infrastructure type things, servers and other items that we need to run the network. And so we're just leasing this, providing a lease to free up money in the, just the regular budget as we go forward. I think last year about this time we did one as well, and then I think probably in August or September we will come forward with another one. But this is for the current purchases that we have done.
Peter?
Does the rent on the UPS include battery changes?
No, we do that.
We do that,
Yeah.
okay. So, because that's a major expense.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, we do all that.
Okay.
Is the
How long have we had that?
Is the rent on the what?
What?
We didn't understand your question, Peter.
UP what?
UPS.
There's a 5 kilowatt uninterruptible power supply that supports our data systems.
Right.
Right, and it was $3,500 a year to rent it. And it keeps it running if event of a power outage and anything happens.
We have multiple ones.
They need new batteries we have multiple ones,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
We do? Oh, you have 3.
Yeah.
Every 5 years, they need new batteries. It costs about $2,000 to replace the batteries and those
Yeah.
things, which is why my question was if we're leasing them, does that include those or not? Okay.
Not to my, I mean, probably gets the first one, but
It's
we have to.
the
replace
first
it.
item on the list of the things that we rent.
Yeah, but nobody knows your PS name.
Yeah, I do.
I don't know.
So can we get?
I'll change it
You guys
next
hear
time, I'll
echo?
save you some money.
Yeah.
I do it all the time.
Live. Can I have a motion?
The
please?
process to change it isn't what it is, it's the actual pattern. Take some from
Oh, I'm
you.
sorry, we're doing all
I won't
motion.
get cheap.
Move
Culture.
to approval of the 2023-24 lease agreement with the Capital Financial Service, Inc. as presented.
Second?
Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it, motion is carried. Next is the 2023-2024 coordinator contracts.
So we previously discussed this, so we're just looking for approval of the contracts.
I'll move approval of the 2023-2024 coordinator contracts as presented.
Second.
All right, Susan has it. All right, any further discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it, motion is carried. Next is the revised extracurricular additive schedule.
Okay, so this schedule, we bring forth any time that we have a recommendation for either an addition or a revision. We have one of each this evening. Really excited about a new club that actually did occur throughout this past school year at Glacial Drillman. So generally, once we have an established club, of course, we want it, the advisors, should receive compensation for that. And you see a really nice summary that was written up about what they did this year and the purpose of the club. So the recommendation is to have the compensation aligned with all the other, similar type advisorships. So that is one addition to the schedule, the D&D club. Why don't I pause there, see if you have any questions on that first.
I'm smiling because I love that club. My daughter was in it and kids love it. Kids love it.
My son will be disappointed to hear that you're finally getting one years after he graduated. And actually, I would have to say 30 students on a regular basis, it's a pretty substantial
Yeah.
group.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So just for the record, if you approve this tonight, we will make that retro for this past school year so that advisor receives compensation. So. Okay, the second one is a recommendation for a change in the compensation for the middle school athletic director. So as you might imagine, that position is quite different than high school where we have, a full-time activities, athletics and activities. But nonetheless, the participation that we've had at the middle school has increased pretty substantially over the last 5 years. And as the one thing that's so good, or it's a key part about our middle school athletics, it's about participation. There are no cuts, and so the more kids we have, the more games we schedule, the more teams we have, and so on. And so Chris and her team have been tracking kind of the time amount, to fulfill those duties. And so we are recommending that increase that's on the schedule up to 12%, and that's comparable as we look at the time commitment of some of the other positions that are on the schedule. So it's not a real detailed formula, but that's how we generally make those recommendations, just looking for similar type positions. So that is on the second page of the document. So the current is 8% at 3,200, so the recommendation is to go to 12% at 4,800.
This is for the extracurricular?
Yeah,
For athletic director and GDS, right?
right, so it's in, the amounts are in red
Yep.
on the second page of the schedule.
Oh, got it, okay.
Are there any questions? Yes. Susan?
Dan, I was just wondering, it was my impression, maybe that's changed in the last few years, and I just haven't followed that closely enough, but basically our director at the high school does athletics and extracurriculars,
Yeah,
and the position at Glacial Drumlin is only athletic.
right. Yeah, so it's basically, so a teacher generally holds that position and then does this, scheduling, So the last two advisors or athletic directors we've had, Dan Sweefel held that position for a number of years. And then the last couple of years, Nate Verhage held the position.
Okay, but it is limited to the athletics?
It is, yes.
Okay.
Elizabeth, you have a question?
Yeah, comment and a question. So excited about Dungeons and Dragons Club. I think that's great. I love how much participation you're getting, Chris, for athletics at middle school, and I think something for us to think about just as a board and looking at you, Eric, because we're always talking about sports and equity, right? But like, what does it mean to continue that momentum around engaging in athletics in like a competitive, but not like, I don't know, there's like that sort of elite athlete component, I think, that comes sometimes with high school sports. So how do we sort of carry that momentum so kids can continue to participate in athletics without necessarily being on track for elite competition, varsity, or whatever. So just flagging that.
Yeah. But if you don't mind, on that note, and as we recall, we did have a little bit of a conversation in a previous board meeting about participation. We do have it, Joe Schneider, our activities director, will be giving a report to the board coming up, either summer or fall. And one of the things he'll talk about is also that we actually do have intramurals as well.
Oh, good.
And how that fits into the athletic program.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, because we do our kids a disservice when we open it, and then all of a sudden it gets exclusive again, and then you lose opportunities to learn lifelong skills and just have a good time playing sports. So, second question, or a question that I have, not related to this, but always because I notice these things, Dan, all of our advisors get paid the same amount except for the after-school club advisor, who gets paid half of the other advisors on that list, starting when you go down.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious about why that is.
It looks like they're at 1%.
Yeah, I just don't know why.
I really don't know, and is that position filled currently?
Yeah, no, it's not currently filled, but that is something we're looking to bring back as some sort of after-school program.
Yeah.
Our problem has been the busing situation, and we've been trying to figure that out. Right now, we have just a late bus, but that's at 5:30, which is really a long time. So we're trying to figure out something, if we could just have an after-school program till 4:30 or 4:45, so kids are still at home in time for dinner and things like that. So we've been talking, but we would and we have people that would like to work after school, so that's why we haven't brought anything forward.
Okay.
We just haven't figured out the transportation.
Okay, but the expectation, Chris, when eventually we bring that forward, is that the pay will be equal to the other advisors, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
We'll bring it
Well,
forward.
let me pause that. The pay is generally based upon the amount of time.
Okay.
And so I'd like to research that first before, I don't know, there must have been a rationale.
Yeah, got it.
So-
It's an hourly rate. It's been like an hourly rate because we've had different people in that position.
Yeah, that
In the past, it's been
no need to
a rate. Yep.
make a commitment. It's something I noticed, and so I just wanted to ask.
Yeah, so I honestly don't know why it is.
Okay.
I
Great, thank you.
shouldn't make any assumptions about what there should have been a rationale.
Yeah, and I don't want you guys to make public declarations that you have to then walk back, so, thank you.
Any other questions? Not, let's make a motion.
I'll move approval of the revised extracurricular edited schedule as presented.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it, motion is carried. And then lastly, LGBTQ plus Pride Month resolution.
Okay, so a number of board members reached out, we had some parents as well, and about the idea of recognizing as a formal resolution. And so what we did is looked at a number of samples that we found from other school districts, and our team looked at those and kind of combined into one that we thought properly give due recognition that seemed to make sense. So we have a resolution for your consideration this evening.
I'd like to move approval of the LGBTQ plus Pride Month resolution as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? Peter?
I'd just like to thank you for bringing this forward and letting us, so that we have an opportunity to express ourselves on this issue. As it starts with, the mission of the Monona Grove School District is to be a safe, equitable, and inclusive learning community for everyone. And I think it's important this day and this year that we make a statement I find this valuable and important. Thank you.
Agreed. All right,
Yeah, I agree with Peter.
okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it, motion is carried. All right, next are discussion items. Grade configuration of 4K2 elementary schools.
Yeah, I'll start, and I'll turn it over to you, Elizabeth. So, as Elizabeth mentioned during her report, the committee, discussed the configuration. And so we put together some slides just to help guide, I think, the conversation this evening. So with that, I think, like, Elizabeth could kind of facilitate through
Oh, sure.
that, or co-facilitate, however you like, but,
That sounds great.
okay.
So as I alluded to in the board report, we've had sort of 2 conversations about this at TLE, and now where we're at is sort of to walk through what we as a board feel like we would need in order to make an informed decision on whether or not we're going to keep the school configurations as they are, or move into a community schools model, which means that both Cottage Grove School and Taylor Prairie would both become 4K2 sites, as opposed to the current configuration of 4KK and then first and second. And so we'll see in the board slides that are, or the slides that are in the presentation, a little bit around history here, which actually many of you have, that I don't have. But that back in 2018, there was a vote to adopt a transition model. It wasn't unanimous, but it was a majority vote that made it so Taylor Prairie became 4KK, and that Cottage Grove School became first and second grade, and then Granite Ridge opened for the remainder of elementary school before folks merged into GDS. We've been doing that for a number of years now, and I think there are things about it that go really well. And I think that there are things about it based on conversations that we've had at TLE that, are things that are worth considering, right? The number of transitions that we're asking of our youngest learners, some of the continuity in terms of just like how learning happens at that young age and the student experience around those pieces. And whether or not this is a good opportunity for us to reconsider, with a little bit of data and a little bit of information, whether or not we want to, think about making a change there. So in February, the TLE committee met, and we got an update from administrators, and we had a discussion around the impacts. And then, like I said in my board report on the 24th, we met again, specifically to talk primarily with Emily and Danielle about their thoughts and experiences and their perspectives around how they, are feeling in their current configuration and what some advantages might be of moving more towards a community school model. So where we left committee, and then we can walk through sort of the key considerations that we're thinking of for today is we would like, as a committee, to recommend that the administration go back and gather some of this information, this data, to be able to present a recommendation to Teaching, Learning, and Equity Committee, which then we would shepherd to the board as a recommendation for whether or not we would change to a community schools model. And so the goal for today's discussion is what would the board need in terms of information and data to be able to feel like they can make an informed decision when that comes to vote. Ideally, we can talk about timeline at the end, but we'd be thinking about fall for a vote for that, so that it would give staff adequate time to prepare a transition plan if that was the direction that we were going. So that's kind of the overview of the land. Anything, Dan, that you wanted to add there?
I think you nailed it.
You know what? Thank you very much. Any questions before we get started in terms of things that we thought as a committee were primary considerations? And then obviously all of this is open to additions, changes, which is why we want to have this discussion here today. But before we get forward, are there any broad questions about what the purpose of this section of the meeting is? Great. Yeah.
No questions, Dr. Francis.
Great. Yes.
Yes, Susan?
I just think that this is a good process. It is going to a committee. It is advisory to the board. The committee has made a commitment that they've talked about as a committee to do significant research on this and to come back with a recommendation. That's exactly what we planned as a board for our committees to do. And again, this committee has a commitment to look at significant factors in this analysis. And I strongly support this process as it's being proposed.
Thanks, Susan. Right, so there's three main buckets of things that we thought as a committee we need to really do some deep dive in terms of being able to make an informed decision, and we'll kind of dive into each one of those buckets. And then Dan is here, Lisa's here, the elementary principals are here, Chris is here to able to answer some questions and talk some more specifically about the type of information we would need. But the three general buckets are first and foremost, centering student and student experience, right? So when we think about our youngest learners, specifically in Cottage Grove, what is their experience? What do we want that to look like from both a teaching and learning perspective, as well as from a social emotional perspective, a behavioral perspective, all of those elements. Second is financial impact, right? Because everything has a cost, and so we need to think about, staffing, we need to think about supplies, we need to think about the way the buildings are set up, some of those elements. And then the third bucket is how we are communicating and engaging with staff, with families primarily, and then with the community at large. And Katie's not here today, but we've been really fortunate that Katie's been coming to our TLE meetings to help sort of fill in and inform those pieces. And so she has some information here that I know Dan can shepherd for her. So we can start with student experience, Dan, if that sounds good. You want to take?
Yeah.
You want? Yeah, or I can do it. I'll just keep rolling.
I think so.
You want to keep rolling?
Yeah.
All right. All right. So, oh, this looks different than mine. Oh, it's fine. I can look up there. But the slides that you're presenting are different than the one in Board Docs. Just so you know.
No.
There's a third bullet point that's in this.
Fourth?
Third. I only have 2 bullet points. Do you have 3 on yours?
No, I'm looking at this. So.
Just roll.
I got it. All right. So from a student experience perspective, there's the teaching and learning pieces, and we know, and I'm gonna channel my inner Lisa Hype here, right? To say that we know that we provide good quality education in the district. There's not a single teacher, educator in our district that's not trying to do their best and do right by kids. And we also know, right, that when kids are in spaces for, more than 1 or 2 grade levels, right, we have this ability to see kids and have kids experience the curriculum in ways that are just different. And so one of the things that I would like, that the committee would like the administration to look at is what are the teaching and learning implications from a student perspective and the student experience perspective. If we go to a model where you're in the building just for longer periods of time, what does that mean for particular students who are on the margins? So students who may need additional supports or students who may need extensions, as well as students that are right on track. The other thing I, as a committee, want the administration to take a look at is the social emotional learning impact. And so that's not just SEL skills, but that's also behavioral pieces. What we heard a lot in committee from administrators is that there's just inherent disruption in taking young kids and moving them from building A to building B, right? And this idea of having just to physically learn new spaces, and what does that mean and how long it takes kids to sort of settle into that. So I think thinking about that as a consideration is important. And then the last one that we have sort of come up with as a committee is this idea around just what does it mean to have a school community and the ability to leverage older and younger kids, right? 2nd graders and 4Kers, right? And that peer modeling piece. That ability to have my same teacher that I've established a really good relationship with sort of throughout this entire early ed experience. And so that's something else that we'd like the administration to be able to consider and then bring forth around what they think the student experience is going to look like in transition. So pause there. What questions do you have around this, or what other information do you feel like as a board we would need to be able to say, yeah, we feel like the student experience is better or worse in a particular way?
Peter?
The teaching and learning has got to come from more than, ultimately it's the student experience. But there's something we have to look at, which is we're going from teams of 4 or 5 to teams of 2 or 3 in terms of the teachers, in terms of their ability to collaborate, in terms of the resources that are available are going to be split in 2 across the grade level. 8 to 4, whatever. 8 to 4. Yeah, I'm sorry, 8 to 4.
Yeah, 8 to 4.
But it depends on also. Mm-hmm. You're right. It is 8 to 4. I'm thinking about. Different numbers, yeah. But so you have this less of ability to collaborate, to find a person with particular skills that can help your situation, from a student to find a person with particular skills, to have available to them usually a person with particular skills to help them deal with whatever situation they're in. So there is that loss there, and we have to make sure that we understand and evaluate that, because it will, in the end, affect the teaching and
I
learning.
think that's a really good question. I'd actually like to have one of our administrators speak to that, about how our teachers currently meet as teams, and make sure everyone understood, Peter's point, that right now we generally have 8 sections per grade level. If we were divided, we'd have 4 per grade level in general between the buildings. So is anyone comfortable
Right.
talking?
And it also goes, to support of teachers, particularly new teachers. And I think particularly when you have teachers of color in a situation where they're one of 3 becoming one of 1 kind of thing. And I don't know where you have that, where you don't have colleagues that you can work with and help you navigate, some of these issues. There is a loss, and we. Not saying that it's overwhelming, I'm just saying that we need to evaluate and understand it as part of this process right here.
And I probably, maybe we're not going to get into the merits tonight,
Yeah.
just the process. I'll
Right.
pause
Yeah.
on that.
But I think
yes.
I think that to me, what I'm hearing, right, is that under these bullet points of things, some of that is just the ability for cross collaboration within
Right.
the teachers themselves, right? What does the teaming structures
Right.
look like?
Right.
What are the implications for
and
how
these are
folks move,
right.
affinity groups, right? Those kind of elements.
And these are small enough groups that we're dependent on the skills of individuals and the diversity of skills of individuals to meet some of the needs. And so there's a loss there. And I bring this up because in 2018 it was one of the cons. It was probably one of the most significant cons that we thought of that actually the staff, I believe, came up with when it came to considering this option. And it will result in a little loss of our teaching and learning experience, inevitably.
Yeah.
The question is, what are the trade-offs, right?
Potentially, I don't know. I think
Well,
that's the
yeah,
big
I would-
question, right?
But I know that our team is chomping at the bit to discuss that one.
But safe to say, we'll add it to the list.
All right.
All right. I'm not facilitating. I'm facilitating, but you get to call me, so I'm just thinking for when you're ready to call someone else.
Fill up this next.
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of corollary to Peter's comment, the inverse of that, though, too, which is for this student population, they take the 2 schools combined as a student population, say compare it to a Winnequa or another elementary school in the area, what would be an adequate cohort, right? Because I feel like when I hear 4, it sounds pretty normal to have 4 to 5 first grade sections or something. 8 sounds really big to me, unless it's a really big student population. So I'd be curious to know, are we hitting, obviously the math works where it will change, but is it changing, is it swinging to a point that's unreasonable or odd or, on the other end of a bell curve or something? Or is it just becoming more typical?
And I don't think we can answer that. I don't think our job is to answer that. It's just something that I would like to see an understanding of what that is, particularly when it gets to some certain specialists we have, and how the kids will have access to, and how teachers will have access to those resources that we currently have. I just want to make sure there aren't any significant losses. So.
Great. Susan?
Again, I think the way I would put that is, I don't see it as a loss. I see it as a difference. And basically, what you're gaining is the ability to work with more levels and more staff, more diversely than you can in a 2-grade school. And when we studied this before, the research was very clear about how significantly disruptive the movement between schools and how dramatically, and the data is very clear, how dramatically that affects students in their learning process. So again, I see that. I think about Winnequa, and I remember Winnequa as the middle school, and then they put 3-5 in there as well because we were short space. And all of a sudden, the 3rd grade teachers could work with the 6th grade teachers in working on reading, or the identification of issues. So I just see it not as a loss. I wouldn't use that
Well,
word.
so I think like that, this conversation makes me really happy because I think part of what we want to talk about is what we need in order to make a full decision. And part of that is like, we all have our thoughts, our feelings, our point of views. I think it's really interesting, Peter, the one that you bring up. And I'm curious to see like when we finally get time for justification, which I promise y'all it's coming, like the extent to which some of these things that are assumptions that are actually not going to be different, right? So I can't speak for CGS, I can speak for Taylor Prairie because my child just went there. Like, I don't know how they do their teamings, but they're already broken up into wings, right? Like, so they already have like cohorts anyway. So I think an interesting thing for us to like. When
Well,
it's-
yes. I'm not making any value judgments. We're asking for what information we need.
I know,
And this is
but that's-
information I need to help make a
That's what
decision.
I'm
That's
saying,
all.
but that's what I really like about this conversation, because it's like really interesting to see like all the point of views. And so, yeah. And I think it'll be interesting to see which things we think are gonna be different that aren't, which things we think aren't gonna be different but are, because I think there's gonna be some of that too, so. Anyway, that's all.
Rochelle, did you have a question? No, I thought I had some. Susan?
Well, and I was just, as the committee does the work, if you could just keep a list of kind of some of the good resources that you have, so that we can, if we have questions or we want to learn more, we have a good resource pool, directed by the committee work you've already done, rather than just start from scratch all the time. That would be really helpful.
Yeah.
And then kind of good documentation, which you already do, of the work that your committee's doing, so we can see where have you been, what have you learned,
Yeah. And where do we wanna
and
go?
your rationale.
Yep. All right, so what I'm hearing is definitely want to add some info around the teaming components of it and sort of just what that,
Yeah.
like staff collaboration piece. Anything else around student experience that you feel like we definitely need to know this and I don't feel like it's reflected in these points at all. Because the whole goal of this is try to the extent we can, and it's not like we're going to solidify a list today and then never to be changed again, but like, well, I don't want us to have committee make a recommendation come the fall, and then we're sitting here going, oh, I wish I would have known X, Y, and Z, and then all of a sudden we're in a spot. So I'm trying to like sort of let's get all the information out that we feel like we need, so that then the administration can feel like they know what they're doing. To the extent that you can on a Wednesday night. Anything else on student experience that y'all can think of at the moment? I got a team.
Not for these, if they're older kids, the same thing applies, but for K2, I don't think it makes that much difference. When the kids get to middle school and high school, they really benefit from having a larger peer group, that they can find people who are like them. But my own experience and what I think I understand is when they're younger, it's not that big a deal. So it is something, but I don't think that it raises the level of concerns that I would have to see that. So.
Okay, well, let me have to change my mind. Anything else? All right, next, go
Okay,
ahead.
real quick, it was my fault as far as the mix-up in the bullet points. So I hit PDF too soon before all the edits were done, and so.
Sandbagging it, Dan, I
Yeah.
see it. All right, next slide, channeling my inner Peter Sobel. So I'm moving out of my Lisa Hyde hat and putting on my Peter Sobel hat. And what is the financial impact is the thing that we want to look at. And so the things the committee talked about were certainly staff FTE, right? Like, do we have enough staff? Or we need to hire staff? What is that going to look like? And also for some of our staff that may be shared staff, right? The specialist staff, sort of what does that mean? The school facilities, that came up in committee already around like, maybe we have a building that's meant for little people instead of medium-sized people, right? And sort of what might that look like from a cost perspective. Transportation and transportation costs, because the way that our routes are currently set are gonna have to change, as well as going back to shared staff, right? There's some transportation costs that are inherent into like, I get paid to move from building to building. And then just things around instructional materials and supplies. Like Peter always brings up a really great point around libraries, for example, right? The library that you would have for 4 and 5-year-olds looks different potentially than the library that you have for, first and second graders. So what does it mean to sort of be able to expand on both ends there? And so those are kind of the things that we were thinking for financial. But again, pause here. What's missing? What else would you want to know outside of sort of these things, or nuances within these things that you want to make sure that folks hit?
No questions.
I think, all right, questions.
It's a good.
I think the last time we did this, we thought there was a differential of about $100,000 in annual operating costs for the two schools versus one. I think that's where that's sort of the number we
Up or down?
settled.
More?
Two schools was more, yeah.
Let's see. It's like Price is Right.
That's right.
It's like closest without going
Yeah.
over, Peter.
Mark, do you foresee any?
Well, I think the biggest, staffing obviously is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
But, and obviously I don't know the history, but Taylor Prairie and Cottage Grove were built to have kindergarten through a certain
Yeah.
grade initially, so I don't think that that's necessarily an issue, other than maybe some restructuring here and there depending on how they were set up for these different grades. And materials, if you have all in one, you split them in half and go to the other one. It's not that easy, I understand, but in transportation, I don't know, I mean, people are gonna be able to, kids are gonna be able to walk that don't walk now to both of theirs, but then you're going across town as well. So it's just, I think it's gonna be a matter of demographics and location for how it affects transportation. But, and giving them enough information or enough notice, they can do the routing, like sample routing, and say, okay, move everybody up a grade. If we do this in 24, 25, move everybody up a grade, what does it look like? So, we can play with that as well.
This may not fit with the financial, and I'm not familiar with these two schools, but if I understand it today, people in this part of the district don't have a choice. Their kids go to one for the Ks and then one for the first and seconds. If it's now, there's two options in theory, do we anticipate any contention for those schools? Because one is 30 years newer than one, or anything like that, or?
So I think drawing boundaries is always, sort of the emotion and politics of boundaries is always a thing. I think my understanding from administration is like the actual drawing of boundaries itself, like the physical act of drawing them is not difficult. It's like the sort of politics and pieces. I think for me, and I'm just going to speak for myself here, both as chair of committee, but also just as a board member, I would prefer us not get into a discussion around boundary until we are ready to or have voted on moving in this direction. Because to me, it's almost like pre-inksting, right? Like we're going to have this whole conversation around boundary that's going to me, cloud whether or not it's a better educational what's the good educational decision to make. And so my preference, like I said, as committee chair, is that yes, you're right, and I would prefer to hold on that until after we know this is the direction that we're moving.
And just to clarify, I was not thinking so much that it would influence our decision, just that if we did decide one way, does it have implications on what we need to manage as a district, or?
I think
that's more what
I think so, from a communications perspective, which is kind of the next piece. And also something that when we talk about facilities that we should think about too is those buildings, to my understanding, were not built with the same capacity in mind, like student capacity. And so that makes a difference too. Like, correct me if I'm wrong here, Dan, but Taylor Prairie will hit capacity before CGS,
Right.
correct? And so that has implications too for future growth, move-in, folks that choice in, some of those elements, which we'll want to factor in, particularly as we think about equity, right? As we move forward in terms of this plan. So that to me is part of that facilities piece as well. But yes, there'll be thoughts and feelings for sure.
Susan?
Well, and truthfully, and I'm sure Emily's going to speak to that. How long ago was it that we had second graders in Cottage Grove School? Or we had the mix of kids. How old were the kids in Taylor Prairie 4 or 5 years ago? Before it was 4K.
It was up to first, but
First,
further back than that, it went to second.
you were doing it based on population, in how many classrooms, right? What would fit in the building, right?
Well, we reconfigured when Glacial Drillman opened too, so that shifted everything at that point. But for a long time, there were second graders that it was K2 at Taylor Prairie.
So just real quick, on a side note, I came across the document that the district had created at the time for the referendum for Taylor Prairie to be built. And it opened as a K2 school, But in the documentation, it stated it was designed that it could become a K-5. So,
Yep.
Can't imagine.
We were doing.
Big people.
We were doing middle school, after-school programs in Taylor Prairie after it was built, including sports and extracurriculars.
Peter?
I don't anticipate, I mean, the boundaries, I don't anticipate them being an issue. I expect 20 years down the road when somebody, the Cottage Grove, some development has gone in there and things moved around and one of the schools is older than the other and yeah, I can see, and these boundary disputes, and the school has to redistrict, we have to change the boundary because of whatever, and I can see those getting contentious. I don't think that that should stop us. I don't think and I don't think we're going to run into a buzzsaw tomorrow. I do think, though, we have to have that discussion of the possible impacts. And I think we have to do it up front, and the whole thing, and part of that is a community education piece. So the last thing we want to do is have, the school board decided we're going to have school boundaries, and we didn't get any input on that. I think we have to have that as part of this, the implications of that as part of the discussions. I don't think that they're significant, really up front, but I do think it is just part of the discussion that we have to have. Now, one of the things is that it's going to happen. So it's out there, in the public, and people can give us their feedback on that. The reason I'm not concerned, one of the reasons I'm not concerned about it too much is that when we polled in the last time around, when we did the polling, actually, amongst the staff at least, a lot of staff are residents, there was more support for the separate models and not that much concern about which would bring the boundaries and not that much concern about it. But I do think we need to make sure that it's not an issue, and it's not going to be an issue with the community. And the way we do that is to make sure we have an honest discussion and get input and feedback at the beginning, not necessarily the beginning, but before we make a decision. We have to make that, I think we have to do that before we make a decision. I don't think it's going to be a problem, but I do think we do have to reach out ahead of time.
Yeah, I think that that's interesting. I'm not sure that I agree, but that's okay. I think for me, what I'm wondering from you, Peter, because I really defer to your history here, because you, Eric, Susan, you were part of the original that first discussion. Is when we talk about for me, when I think about where kids are going to go to school, whether we want to couch that in boundaries or whatever, to me, what matters is like the equity components, right? Like, what is the stratification of students, right? What is from all the sort of the identities that we track, right? SES, right? Ethnicity, disability status, right? So some of those other elements, and that I think that makes sense to me in terms of making sure that we have that piece of it. To me, that to me feels like a more impactful part of the decision than like, where am I physically going to draw the lines? And so I guess, is that what you mean when you say boundaries? Or are you actually like, here's a map and here's...
No. The fact that boundaries will exist.
Oh, sure.
Okay. In the future, I don't know what they are. In the future, the fact that they will exist, sometime in the future, and I'll tell you this, sometime in the future, we have boundaries. One of these schools will be perceived as better as the more desirable school to be in than the other. That's unavoidable.
Agreed.
And people know that. People who live in this district don't know that because they've not experienced. I've lived in other places. I've had the experience here. My experience is my property value went up 25% overnight because they changed the high school boundary within the same district.
Yeah,
a few blocks, and it does become an issue. And I'm just saying, we need to throw it out there, and we need to make sure that we have feedback that there's not a buzzsaw out there waiting for us.
I appreciate that clarification, Peter. That makes sense to me in terms of like, I was really interpreting that in like a more like literal, rigid, like...
No, it's just, the fact is, next year we're going to have boundaries. How do you feel about it?
Got it.
Yeah.
My question is more around the racial equity. So if there's a population, right, and making sure that we're equally dividing that amongst the two schools, and that one school is not having all the people of color.
Exactly.
So
yeah, I think when we think about student experience, the identities of the students to the extent to which we have that information, like the things of which are knowable, is an important part of that conversation. Right, because similarly, we want to group all kids of a singular identity, right? Same thing with staff, right? It's the same question, that conversation with staff, right? Like, here's my, you know, hanging in my cohort with identities that match mine, and we all get shuffled in one direction or another. I think it's really important. Great.
Susan? Yeah, again, you just kind of asked it. Thank you very much.
Great.
Michelle?
Oh, I didn't make it.
You're excited and you're putting your hand, I don't know.
You have resting curious.
Resting curious.
Mark?
Yeah, I don't want to belabor the point, but everything you've talked about boundaries, whether it's, you know, in theory or details, obviously that, I think the more information that, and it needs to be done towards the end, obviously after the decision's made, but I've been through it, and it is a pain in the butt. And no matter what, you're going to make people mad, which we know. But it's going to be, you're going to have to, your question about the size is a factor.
Right.
Where they are, the age, and then also when we do the boundaries, if we do the boundaries, have the details and the why and the documentation, because we've got, you know, 50 kids over here that are going to, I'm just going to say, second grade at Cottage Grove, but we don't have the room, or at Taylor Price. Right. That's why we have to adjust these certain things. And you can't gerrymander, that around. It's got to be some kind of clear delineation and reasoning behind it. Like, okay, Taylor Prairie's at capacity, so everybody else has got to go, no matter where you live.
Right.
But obviously, there's natural boundaries and things like that.
Yeah.
But just word of warning, I've been through it, and it is a no-win situation, depending on what you're doing. I think it's going to be a lot easier with the younger kids, but we were doing K-5.
Yeah.
And it was, you're right, people will perceive, oh, that school's better, I don't want to go there. Or my brother went, all three of my brothers went there, now I want to go there.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about is push polling as much as anything else,
Yeah.
right? We're just introducing the idea, getting people used to it, and
This
talking
brings us to
about
our
it in the
next
bigger
topic,
picture.
right, which is around engagement. So before we get too deep down this path, because this to me is exactly where we need to go, and I think the meat of our conversation, but let me make sure, financial stuff, we feel good? Nothing to add there? Great. All right. So then, how do we want to communicate with folks? Let's start with staff. And I'll let, Dan speak to this, more intimately than I can, but I know that there's been some staff engagement already. And my understanding, based on what we've heard in committee, is that in general, staff are pretty supportive of moving to this model because they think it makes it better for kids, it's good for teaching. Dan, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add there in terms of the nuances around staff.
Yeah, so I think we talk about engagement with staff, right? And back to 2018, I'll be honest, there wasn't as much engagement. We surveyed staff, and I think you heard this at the committee, right? That we saw the list of pros and cons. Most of the cons were adult issues, not student issues. And so this time around, we're going to take a very different approach. And the same as we're having a conversation now about the student experience, engaging our staff with that as well. What is best for kids? And so, I think it'll be a much better approach, and we'll have much better, more reliable input as well.
Great. Now families, and kind of where we want to go in terms of communicating. And I think the community sort of adds to that, but to me, when I think about it, as a parent myself too, right? Like, they're an impacted stakeholder in ways that I think are different than the general community, outside of property values, obviously. And so, in my mind, and we talked about this in committee, there's sort of like two phases. There's like the leading up to and the information we need to collect for the board to feel comfortable voting, and then there's like the making it happen piece of it. And I think the community and family engagement pieces around that have to be different. And I'll just say my point of view here is that if we're going to stay student-centered, then I think we can consider a family engagement approach that is about providing information, right? gathering like information and feedback, but that's very different than then we're going to utilize that feedback in a way that could potentially like say, well, the community doesn't agree even though the educators feel like this is the best educational decision for kids, right? And so I think that's the tension there. And then I think as it relates to how we go about doing it, that's a place where I think real deep family collaboration is super important, and I want us to really emphasize that piece of it, right? Because at the end of the day, like, that's the experience, is now this is going to move, and I need to know about what that is. And so that's sort of my point of view. We talked about that a little bit in committee. And so, like, let's have this discussion, at least around the first phase, right? What level of information do we need, and what level of involvement do we feel like we need from families for everyone to feel comfortable being like, yeah, I feel solid in my vote here one way or another. Discuss. I already said nothing yet. I keep waiting.
Yep. I support the change. I would think I was the vote that was for it in the originally, obviously, times changed stuff, but not much of what you're discussing are some things that I brought up before, so.
And I think that one of the things we need to do by our process is figure out where the landmines are going to be so that we can help design a outreach and communication strategy moving forward. And so one of the important things we can try and uncover, we need to think about how we do this, is what are the issues that we're going to run into with the community and with the staff, to a lesser extent, and I don't know, perhaps with the students, but what issues are we going to run into as we move forward with implementation, and how can we best address that or minimize those and address them?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Other thoughts there? I know Katie's not here tonight, but she is thinking about a communication approach sort of similar to referendum a little bit, right? Information, that kind of piece, right? Explanatory. But other thoughts there? Great. So timeline-wise, this is what we're thinking, and we had a conversation with administration. They're comfortable with this timeline too. To me, like, they're the ones that have to do the bulk majority of the work gathering the information. So if this works for them, feels reasonable. So we have a TLE committee meeting on August 23rd, which is when we'll review the recommendation and the information from administration. Then the committee itself will come up with a recommendation, of which will be on the board agenda for the September 13th meeting, which will be the time for us to vote on whether or not it's happening.
Just to clarify, if the recommendation is made, would the target be to do this for the beginning of the 2024 school year, or has that not been discussed yet?
If that would be the earliest, so if that were the target, this would be the recommended timeline to give enough planning time for 2024.
And that's what we would be voting on in September, for a year later.
Correct.
Potentially, yeah.
Now we're going to have to do it this fall.
Well, I know.
Right, like 2 years now.
2 or 3 year runway or something, or, you know,
Could do it this fall.
really shocking.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there's someone gets that about doing that, you know.
All right, and that's that. Any other questions or anything Dan or folks administrative wanted to fill in?
Is it?
Again, that looks optimistic to me. So how many times will that only gives you
I
60 days.
I asked Dan explicitly and his team, because at the end of the day,
time.
but at the end of the, well, the administrators work still, right? They're not out of, their contracts.
But we're
are just
talking about
really-
staff.
So I don't want to speak for you, Dan, so,
Well, that's right, we put committee, for sure we'll review where we're at in August, right? And if we need more time, then it is, but, so we put a possible recommendation. But that would be the earliest that we'd be ready to go. But that would be the goal, if the goal were to be implementation 2024, we really do want that board action in the fall, so we have that whole year to plan. So,
I just wondered how you would be reaching staff during the summer for staff input. Although, it's my understanding that's already been stuff
Yeah.
initiated. So I think that's a piece that's not as clear when you look at this timeline. Someone that hasn't talked to anybody about this is that how are you going to get staff and community input during the summer months when your communications are not as firm? To be able to respond and say, we've already initiated that, we've already done this, I think is helpful. Again, as Peter mentioned, I think I mentioned, documentation of the work that you're doing is really going to help a lot.
Yeah, well, and Katie, like I said earlier, Katie's
Yeah,
been
she'll be
attending the
like that.
TLE meetings so that she's ready to go with the comms plan as well. I have the same thoughts, so. Anything else for the good of the group?
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Well done.
Everybody, there we go. I don't have to do most of the work, I just have to say, yay, look at this, everyone.
All right, future meeting dates, they are listed in board docs.
Really quick, just a thing to note around TLE, we've switched to Wednesdays. For those of you who were on the board last cycle, we met on Mondays regularly. Now we're meeting on the fourth Wednesdays of the month. And as always, all are welcome to TLE.
And also, just note, there is an attachment that just shows, this is the planning document that Lorene and I use in planning the agendas out. So this changes weekly, but we kind of look at when we did things a year ago, what things are coming up. With the transition to one meeting a month, there's some things, Mark pointed out, today that, the short-term borrowing might be the next month and so on. So this is a fluid document, but I thought it'd be good to share so you have an idea of, how we do our planning as well as, what types of things, might be coming up in the future.
This is super helpful.
Susan?
Well, and again, I'm just going to continue to express a concern, and I understand that the majority of the board prefers the one meeting a month. I think it's, first of all, I thought meeting at noon on graduation, when we had 30 minutes to have a discussion about a significant new position and meet that person, was moderately stressful. So I'm going to say, and maybe not in the summer, but as we start to work on major issues, we may want to consider setting 2 meetings a month and just canceling the second when we don't need it. So we've already scheduled 2 additional meetings for June. And we've had to get board input, something that Tish and Dan have to do, and that's not easy. So anyway, I'm
Wait,
just
2 meetings
saying.
for June?
What?
2 meetings for June?
Yeah, we added the 4th,
Right.
and we
For
added the
graduation.
19th.
Well, the 19th is an evaluation, we've done that anyways.
It's a board meeting.
We've done it anyways.
Am I wrong?
Well, yeah, and it's also doesn't
Right,
involve the
it's not
staff or
work.
anybody,
It's
it's
not
just a closed session.
It's a board meeting.
I think we discussed all this previously too, when we decided. to
I'm just
make it
saying, when
one,
you
so.
factually look at the data, it was a concern I had to start, and it's
And we voted on it.
still there.
Eric,
It's
she has
just
the
not.
floor.
That's right.
Sorry.
I said, my first statement was the majority supported 1 meeting a month. My concern, my personal concern as a board member, is that it's difficult to restructure, and the example I used for that was the meeting before graduation. That's just my position as an elected board member.
I think that's a little out of
I
context.
respect your position.
Point of order, it's a little out of context, it's not a discussion item, and we already voted on it.
We're talking about pending meetings. Never mind, not important. Not a big deal.
Thank you for your feedback.
Thank you.
Okay. Motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
You go, you got it, you got it. You got it.
Where's Andrew?
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it.
Should there be, if there's going to be discussion, we need on the agenda, have a discussion.
Well, we do have, I don't have,